I'm Micah Chang, and we're gonna do this presentation together, and I'll just introduce myself really quick and then I'll turn it over to Ayme. But as Kim kindly said, I am a PhD candidate in the Department of History at MSU. I'm hopefully gonna wrap up this year and be done in the spring, otherwise my wife may have some issues with that. But I was really happy to participate this past summer and come and do history that's a little out of the realm of what I normally do. I'm actually an agricultural historian of the Northern Plains. So it was pretty fun to come down more south and more west than I typically kind of operate. And more on that later.
Yeah, I'm Ayme Swartz. I'm one of the archaeologists here on the Beaverhead-Deerlodge National Forest. I'm out of the Butte office and the Dillon office, but I float all over the forest. My normal day job is just walking through the woods, usually through old timber units that are, sterile of anything, or we just have to monitor a cabin that's there. Every now and then I get to go out and see something super cool and record something new that nobody else had recorded before. And then, every now and then, I get to do these types of projects. When I first got onto the B-Bar-D back in December 2020, I'm from Phillipsburg, so I'm pretty local. But I went away here and there for a little bit and then started a Forest Service job over in Washington and thought, Forest Service in Washington's not fun. Like, I'm from the birthplace of the Forest Service. I am definitely moving back home. So I came here December 2020. Of course, that was high COVID times and I wasn't allowed in the office. And my supervisors are like, well, do something fun. Like, entertain yourself, you're a smart girl. I'm like, well, okay, that's good. So I got to looking in our folders and our files, and one of my focuses, I'm a historical archaeologist, so I look up the importance of tin cans and old broken teacups. With that, I actually look at underrepresented cultures and giving that voice to the voiceless, because really, historical archaeology is a super expensive way to learn history. And that's what everybody, including these historians, tell me. They're like, well, you just go out and pick up garbage and it's really expensive to pay you for stuff we already know. And I'm like, well, exactly, I do, but I can do one of three things. I can confirm what you know, I can contribute to what you know, or I can contradict what you think you know, which is one of my favorites.
That's the best.
So much fun. So, and then even going a little deeper down in that, with those underrepresented cultures, I have worked a lot with the Chinese diaspora and the overseas Chinese projects. Even right here in Butte, I was part of that project way back in my college days of 10 years ago. And my master's actually centered around African American archaeology at Fort Missoula with the Buffalo Soldiers. So I dug the dump there, and seeing if we could find, because when you're doing a thesis, you have to have like one of those hoity-toity questions with all of those buzzwords in there that actually, sorry, no offense.
Oh, no.
I have an academic behind me. I need to keep him in front of me while I'm bad talking him, right? So I was looking for if we could find structuralized racism within the dump. Well, we couldn't. Limited time, limited funding. We have a few different things going on in that dump where we have officers and soldiers, typically whites, typically blacks. What are we seeing? Are we seeing a racial difference? Are we seeing the Army difference? We don't know. And then my time was up and I was like, sorry guys, I gotta graduate and I gotta get out of here and go get some jobs because I've got a lot of student loan debt. And so then, back to 2020, I started looking for African Americans on this forest. We do know about the Chinese here, but I couldn't find any site here that we knew of that had African American connection. And then I come across a newspaper article about the Browns. And I was like, I'll be damned, that homestead, that is on Forest Service. We do have an African American site on the forest. And so I brought that to my professor, my supervisor, and he says, okay, well, what would our goals be for that? And I said, well, first and foremost, in the climate that we're in and in the day and age we're in, we need to get an African American site documented on this forest, and we might have one of the best ones here. Being that Butte is, not even arguably anymore, the best place in the world to come mining. We had all of the people here mining. We had every single nationality coming here, and it's represented in our architecture, in our neighborhoods, in our food, and even today we see that. But we don't have we don't have much about the African American culture that was here in Butte. And I think, you know, we need to do justice for that, and we can support this theory of, you know, we had African Americans, they were mining on the periphery. Why is that? Well, because Marcus Daly wasn't allowing them to mine underground Butte. It's why the capital is in Helena, right? So that was my main goal, to document an African American site on the National Forest Service system. Part of Afro Outdoors during the legislation, the congressional hearing was we don't have a place of our own on the National Forest System. We don't feel a connection with the land. Well, I am just this lowly white girl in Butte, Montana, but I'm going to try and change that. It's very important to me. Our second goal, Mike also wanted me, my supervisor also wanted more partnerships. I have a great connection with the University of Montana. Kelly Dixon, Dr. Dixon, she is a historical archaeologist. When you type in female archaeologist into Google, she is literally the first one that pops up. She did African American Saloons in Virginia City, Nevada. It's a great book called Boomtown Saloons. She also did a lot of the overseas Chinese work. She is an incredible gal, and I thought, boom, connection. We can make that partnership. We can do that collaboration. Then the Forest Service also gets that help. And then we thought, well, because several of my colleagues are from MSU, and they're like, what about MSU? And I'm like, I don't know anybody from there. And my supervisor did. He, one of his college roommates is now a professor over there in the history department, right? Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, hey guys, like I got some connections to the history department here. Do you guys care about history? We're like, well, yeah, it does. It's kind of like what we do. We just do it through garbage. And so we went over there and had a meeting, and it went so well. Here we are today. We are making that collaboration happen. One of the final goals of this project was every year we, as a Forest Service system, hire thousands of seasonals. Many of you might have started as a seasonal. You know someone who was a seasonal for the Forest Service. There is no greater job in the world. Am I wrong? Like I miss my seasonal days so much. You get to go out in the backcountry and gosh, on horses. On the BBRD, they do take horses, you know, or just go wandering in the woods, and you get paid for it. I don't understand it. Most people would do it for free, but we don't tell them that. And we do this large hiring event, and we're not getting anybody. We aren't getting we'll have 10 people on our applicant list, or that we have to share. We'll get 100 people on our applicant list. We have to share that with every other forest in Montana, Region 1. And, you know, I'm allotted 2 seasonals. I can hardly get one. We have the best job in the world. Why is this? Why can I only get 1 seasonal? I mean, if you guys want to be a seasonal, come talk to me after this. And so what a better way to go to these university systems and start recruiting and start showing them that we actually have super cool jobs that maybe we don't get paid a lot of money for, but we can live off of it, and we can show you how to live off of the land so that when you don't get paid a lot, you can live off the land. And then part of that with the Forest Service, we have what are called eligibility calls on our sites, on our archaeological sites. And that goes hand in hand with that National Register of Historic Places. And so right now, all my predecessors before me on all forests that I've worked on, they have just left those calls in limbo. So they're all just potentially eligible calls floating out there. And then they're like, oh, a timber sale. We got to protect everything here. We don't want to do any research. We don't have time. We got to just protect it. Well, that doesn't make the timber people very happy. And I'm a people pleaser. I want everybody to be happy. I want us all to be friends and to get along. And range, this is one of my coworkers and good friend. She is part of the range program. And when they're like, we have to move this stock tank, and a lot of archaeologists before, they just didn't have time, or they weren't sure of all of the different resources that we had on the forest, because they didn't have everything that we have right now, technology-wise. And so when they come to me, I can start making those calls right now, whether it's eligible or not for that National Register. I think we're, and then, of course, that goes right into the famous quote by Gifford Pinchot that we do. And this is why I am doing those eligibility calls, because I do want to do the greatest good of the greatest number in the long run, for the greatest amount of people. Ooh, we got that one short. It's the greatest good for the greatest number of people in the greatest amount of time. And with this project, we are able to, I think Pinchot would give us all a big hug right now for doing this project. He would be so proud of us. So what in the heck did we do out there? With this African American site, many of you guys probably know there's not a lot about it. We got to sleuth through a bunch of archives, and you know, there's a few newspaper articles, there's a few books on it. When we went to MSU, they were like, well, what do you got? And we're like, not much. You're the historians, like, we do garbage, you do paperwork, like, how can we make this happen? And so really, they had a lot of faith in us. These historians had so much faith in us, like wild and rowdy archaeologists, it's incredible. Because they're like, okay, so you want to do a field school. You want us to go camp out in the woods for 2 weeks, in the beginning of June. You know, we don't know what the weather's like at the beginning of June. Hot, cold. This year was so cold. Really cold. Yeah, so cold. And they're like, there's no showers. And you're gonna have us bring in porta potties, okay? Because we had them buy us porta potties. And they just had so much faith that this was gonna work. And that's exactly what we did. We put together a field school. It was 2 weeks long in the beginning of June, where we had 11 students and 3 to 4 overhead, and we had a cook trailer out there. Everybody had their tents. We had porta potties. We did have a portable shower, but it was so cold nobody wanted to do that. We set it up much like if any of you guys have been a part of a fire camp. That's exactly what we set it up like, where we had the morning briefing, we had breakfast and lunch, and then dinner together. I guess I should have said this at the beginning. If there's any questions, just stop me and ask them, because if we, get too off, it's okay. It's a very organic environment here, much like I run my field school. It's very organic and laid back. And they asked for a syllabus, and I was like, I don't have a syllabus. I don't know what the weather's going to be like. And lo and behold, that actually was really helpful, because that first week we were able to do some really good field work. We got out, we found that brown homestead. We did some survey around the cabin that we found. We got some gross. We got some artifacts from it. I don't know what's in there. Then that next week, it was so freaking cold that we did come to the archives. And then I believe, do you have a thing about the archives at all? Archives
I can talk about the archives.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, why don't you?
As Ayme said, we like our paper. And I'll just add on, it wasn't just uncomfortable camping for 2 weeks. At MSU, they put all the grad students in a place with no windows. So seeing the sun is unusual for us too. So it was quite a leap of faith, I think, on both ends. But to the methodology, one of the things that was really fun for me as a professional historian, when I go and do research, I don't get to go hike, I don't get to be outside. I go to the National Archives in DC. They put me in a place with no windows. I swear they keep it in there at like 61 degrees. You're freezing, you have to go in with a Patagonia jacket, or else you're just gonna have a miserable time.
No wonder people love us here. We have windows.
And it's warm, the sun is making it.
And for those of us who don't know, that's actually what's on the other side of these walls over here. That top picture, that's us.
So one of the things that we did was we learned from the public archaeologists how to do work as an archaeologist. Very elementary, very top level, but it was very new. And then for people who weren't from the discipline of history, we also had a professional historian from MSU, Dr. Janet Orr, who is sitting right here, and she couldn't be with us today because she's teaching. It's the first day of classes at MSU. Kind of give everyone a rundown and some responsibilities on how to do archival research. And the Butte Archive was very generous with their time and patience, and having us just rummage through vertical files and file requests. So
all without showers.
Yeah, all without showers. So
it was very nice of them.
But it was taking methods from 2 different disciplines and trying to reconstruct this past story that has been erased or lost, as Ayme said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we basically brought the classroom outdoors. That's our big long cook trailer there. It's a really fun little thing. I think the greatest discovery I made of the whole trip was that side of the cook trailer can be used as a giant whiteboard. And it was wonderful. Yeah. So we had our maps up there. We were teaching, potential future co-workers how to do archaeology, because essentially what we're doing is we are giving these students a tool for their toolkit, so when they go to apply for a federal job, whether it be archaeology or history, or even a range or a weed spraying job or any of these other jobs, they can say, you know what, we partnered with the Forest Service on this, we do know a little bit about that. So that's what we did, we took it outdoors. You know, it kind of reminds me of the Forrest Gump saying, where he's like, she taught me to climb and I taught her to dangle. That's the kind of relationship that we had. Like, we were both doing the same things, but it was just a little bit different of a way to do it. And then bringing it together, we found out that we do the same things, they're just called different things. So what can archaeology do, and how can archaeology help these historians who are in those archives? Like I said earlier, we have the tangible objects. We can do one of those 3 C's, and we were prepared to do that up there. I have to look at my notes here. So yeah, so while we were up there, I never did get an overview photo of that. I'll have to go back up and get that overview photo. It is, you get up there and it's this really beautiful open field. It's actually an allotment right now. There's cows in there. Then there's a little cabin that is slightly fenced off. Then behind the cabin there is a large vacant area that's about the size of the famous Brown's boarding house that Micah will get into. We don't know about that yet. This is all going to be to come next year. We're going to have another one. We'll get into that. And then across from all of that, we did find a dump. And that's the archaeologist's dream right there. That's where we get all of our information. What are these people eating? What are they using? What other kind of little things do they have? Are there toys in there? Are there inkwells in there? With this one, there were some bones. There was a lot of ceramics, a lot of ironstone, which is also known as hotelware. It was the cheaper porcelain of the day. Usually it was at larger like boarding houses or hotels. So we start thinking, we wonder, is this the boarding house? There were a lot of bullets up there. Some were dated to about the time period. Not much of a mystery there. The stove legs are always fun. We can identify that. We came across this bone. It is a cut bone. So a lot of times, and this goes for like dinosaurs too, because a lot of times people are like, oh, archaeologist, every time I'm on an airplane. Oh, archaeology, you do dinosaurs. And I'm like, no, I do dead people in garbage. But we are into bones when there is evidence of butchering, a projectile point in it. That would be super cool. We would be interested in that. Anytime a human had to alter that bone, that's when we get involved in bones. This one is of a moose. We have a butchered moose bone. So they ate a moose up there. This one can be dated to about that time period. We know because of the amount of decay. We had a lot of other types of ceramics, some earthenware ceramics. This one is the spongeware. And we can pass these around too. Have y'all had your tetanus shots? I was due for mine for the longest time. Some caps, some more bones. Right now we haven't done any of the analysis on that. We don't have a heck of a lot. It was all just surface finds. The other thing that we do with these objects, there is the glass bottle up there, but as we know, like, I'm still using an 1890s bottle as a flower vase. If somebody was to excavate my house, they would think I was a 14-year-old boy who liked lipstick and old, like, bottles from 1890. They would be so confused what I would be with all of my lipsticks and makeups and then my dirt bike and snowmobile stuff. So how do we combat that? We start putting that on a table, and then we find where that overlaps, and then we can get a pretty good date range for a site. Let's see. The other thing I learned more when I'm documenting cabins. I document them just kind of like what I see in just a few terms, because a lot of times I don't care. That's a bad way to say that, but it's just. It's so much, and we have such a short amount of time out there, and we have to do the triage archaeology. We have to get out there, get it done, get it recorded, and then it's done. But taking out these architectural historians, I learned what a hog trough cabin was, and now I can't wait to find another one because I'm totally writing all about it. I also, right after, I got kind of into cabins at that point. I was like, ooh, you can learn so much about these. We know that the dovetail was very much a Norwegian style. The dog trough cabin, there's only like 2 of them in Montana that are left from that early time period. And we do have one on the Beaverhead-Deerlodge, super exciting. Back to this story. The other thing that happened out there was more eyes on the ground, because usually it's me and 1 or 2 seasonals, and you're kind of missing part of the picture. Archaeologists are only playing with a half a deck anyways all the time, and then you end up getting just like 3 of us on this massive landscape. We're not going to see anything. We ended up seeing the remnants of the Model A that they talk about. It was the I don't know my classic cars. The Model A car, truck, whatever it is. We found the skeleton of it. That is super cool. And the Browns are talking about that. So that right there is bringing, that history to life for us, you know. Gosh, am I missing anything up there?
No, I mean, that we found the name.
Oh, that's right. And we were able to confirm the name on that. Our site files had it as J.E. Kendall, and Micah and I were looking at this cabin here, and it's J.B. Kendall, and on all of the boards his name is written on there. So were they shipped up on the train and then brought up? We're not too sure about that yet. Yeah. Let's see the next. So like I mentioned earlier, this project is an ongoing project. We plan on doing another field school. I think it'll be 7 days next summer. We also are considering incorporating it with our PIT project, our Passport in Time project. So then we accept volunteers. So you don't only have to be a student, you know, you could just be a volunteer and come hang out with us for a week. And all food is provided. We ate great up there. I think I gained 10 pounds despite the frigid cold weather. We ate like steak every night. I couldn't believe it. And there is another site that we want to go visit. It is actually the location of the stamp mill that Carolyn Van Horn, which we'll get into, that she funded to get put up there. We also, one of our last days, came across a sawmill up there. And are curious now if that's also related. And you know, I probably don't have to do this, but being the good Forest Service employee that I am, we do ask for protection of the site, and I do remind you that, you know, looting objects is illegal, and it can be 25 years in prison or $250,000 a fine. And that goes for, you know, native artifacts and also historic artifacts. All of the mining carts and rusty barrel rims that come off a forest, that is illegal to do. It may seem like garbage, but it is an archaeological resource. I was actually told that, and I learned that when I was in 4th grade here on the B-Bar-D, and I'm pretty sure it was my current supervisor's dad, who was the forest archaeologist at that time. I was digging in a can dump over at Coolidge Ghost Town in the Big Hole, and I have a scar from digging in that can dump, which I should have got a tetanus shot for. And a Forest Service employee came up and yelled at me and told me that this is illegal to do. And so now I'm like, like this is my mission. I am spreading the good word here. It is illegal. But yes, it's very exciting. We hope to have some more archaeological outcome and some more, one of those 3 big C's to the story that Micah is about to talk about. Yeah, so we touched on this a little bit, part of our partners here. We actually think that this is probably the first time MSU and U of M have ever collaborated besides a football game. Like, being academics and science-based people, like, I've never even gone to a football game. Like, I don't even really know what this is, this rivalry. We're just like, hey, yeah, this is fun. But it really was. Kelly did such a great job coming up, and she actually funded the credits for that, and then Janet supplied the students.
So I'm going to switch over here, and I'm going to just really quickly disclose that I'm just kind of the messenger. And as Ayme already said, there were 11 people working on this project, and when we did the run-through of this project, every student had a piece of the research that they were heavily invested in. So I'm just going to fly over the top level of this, and if you're interested in one or more aspects of it, I'd be happy to give you the contact information of the student or graduate student who did that piece. But I'm here representing Montana State University, and in particular, Professor Janet Orr, who is a professor in the history department. Her focus is in a discipline of history called public history. So public history is kind of the academic language for museum work, work in archives, and interpretation work when you go to National Park Services and there's those beautiful signs and you read a little bit about the history. So that's just some of the aspects of public history. And MSU is trying to grow its public history presence. So us participating in this is hopefully the beginning of more partnerships, deeper partnerships, and also gathering more students and attracting them to this discipline so we can get them out on the ground, as Ayme said, and working with cool local collaborators like Ayme and Mike. But if you have any questions more on any aspect of this, I will direct you in the right place. But I am just here kind of synthesizing. I know a little bit of a lot, but not a lot about a little bit. So, as Ayme said, this is a joint UM-MSU immersive field school, and this is how we pitched it to both universities so that we could both get credits for students, whether they're from University of Montana or MSU, and let me tell you, that is a very hard thing to do, and it's emblematic of how difficult and how rarely these two universities collaborate, that their course numbers don't line up, which is an absolute nightmare to try and navigate. So this was mostly my job, were the fun logistics of getting money and talking to the universities, which is not that fun. But for most of the other students here, we had the whole spectrum of students. We had undergrad students who were freshmen going on to their sophomore year, who had no idea what they wanted to do, to master's students who needed a thesis project and may pick up on this with the African American homesteading site, working more with Ayme and Mike, to advanced graduate students who are going to graduate this year, both myself and Alexandra Orr, who's at UM, and she's doing comparative lit. But kind of the broad goals for this for the students were to gain federal archaeology skills so that they may apply for these seasonal positions or may explore other career options rather than what's told to them that they can only teach high school history if they're a history major. Learn how to conduct field surveys. Doing field work is very foreign to the office historian. And understanding archival research and processes, just in case we had undergraduate students who were unfamiliar with our methodologies or people from other disciplines. So those were kind of the broad pitches for this course and to get credits. The site itself, this is kind of vaguely where it is here in this yellow square, but if you'll see here, Pipestone Springs, Piedmont, it's kind of small. You have Whitehall right here. And then you can see that actually the railway is running through up here and taking you to Homestake Pass. And if you go northwest amorphously from there, you'll end up at Camp Caroline. And I'll talk a little bit about the difficulty of identifying Camp Caroline here later on. I don't have it in this slide, but we talked to a railroad historian at MSU who came and spoke to the group one day while we were here. His name's Dale Martin, and if you're interested at all in railroad history, you need to look up his book. It is just fabulous. Do you guys sell it?
I don't think we do.
Okay. It's through the Montana State Historical Society Press out of Helena. It's a fantastic book. But he came to us and, we didn't know what we were expecting. And he went back and pulled all of the railroad timetables and was able to deduce that when the railroad was running from Butte to Homestake Pass, you would reasonably be able to get on a train in the morning from Butte, go to Homestake Pass, walk up to Camp Caroline, do your business, get back on the train in the afternoon, and arrive back here in the evening. So that kind of painted this new picture of Butte's periphery for us both, I think, as historians and archaeologists, understanding how something that feels so remote, as you'll read in some of these primary sources that I have pulled out here in front of you, such as Camp Caroline, probably takes longer to get back, like maybe an hour from here?
Yeah.
It probably takes an hour to get back there from here with our cars and with roads. But that really painted a picture that the community in Butte was very connected with its periphery. You could go about your business out in the mountains back there and come back by the end of the day and have supper with your family. So this is kind of the site we're working with. And here is a claim map. Where is my pointer? Oh, I think it died. On your guys' right, it's a clay map of the Homestake District in Jefferson County. And if you look, you'll see some of the mines here and the brown claim. Is that correct? Yeah. I'm going to switch to a narrative that was actually written by Alexandra Orr, that graduate student I mentioned at UM. She writes literature, and she composed for us all of the primary sources that we took and all the research we did at the Butte Archives and some of the research we did up in Helena at the State Historical Society. She wrote a little narrative that I'll read to you in her words. And hopefully it gives you a little bit of texture on the history that we composed, both from the physical records and the historical paper trail. And let me just also put a little asterisk here. There are people in this room who know a lot more about certain aspects of this, so I may deflect their way if a certain question arises. And we are open. The function of this talk, in part, is to receive feedback from the audience if you know more about something than we do, so we can incorporate that in the historical record. In 1901, an elegant and wealthy modiste named Carolyn Van Horn arrived in Montana to the high altitude area around the Continental Divide above Butte. Carolyn had been born in 1859 in Germany and married the wealthy son of a German duke. By 1894, her tumultuous marriage had dissolved, leaving the entrepreneurial Caroline with time and money on her hands. Already a business-motivated woman, she had previously owned and operated her own dressmaking shops in London and Chicago. Carolyn had previously decided to invest heavily in the Blackwell mine in Montana and arrived in the area to manage the facility. By 1907, Carolyn had retired for the first time and sold her stock, but the small settlement that sprung up around the Blackwell mine came to be known as Camp Caroline. This area attracted prospectors from around the country who came in search of its mineral wealth. In the years before and after the Civil War, African Americans were eager to escape the cycle of slavery, poverty, and social ostracism that endured in the Southeast. They wanted to exercise their skills in farming, mining, logging, engineering, and entrepreneurship in a more tolerant and racially integrated environment. The American West became a very attractive choice to the African American migrant because of its reputation as a place of wide open vistas, rich gold mines, and the freedom of the open range. The influx of African Americans in Western territories that occurred after 1849 was the largest unforced migration of people of African descent in American history. Charles Flagg, born in 1840, arrived in Montana in 1880. Side note, if you're curious more about the Flaggs, there is a book in the archives reading room that has more on their genealogy and how they arrived here and where they're from. Charles and his wife Elizabeth, their children, and all of their worldly possessions made the perilous journey west by covered wagon. They settled above Butte in Camp Caroline, where Charles owned several gold claims. Charles, a shrewd man of many talents, mined his claims, worked as a carpenter, built his family homestead in Camp Caroline, and owned a home in Butte off of Dakota Avenue. Janetia, Charles, and Elizabeth's daughters went on to marry another African-American migrant who also lived in the area, Richard Brown. Richard traveled to Montana in 1887, bringing with him his engineering expertise. He worked as a hoisting engineer and miner for Mountain Chief Mine in the Homestake area, the largest mining company in the area, Marcus Daly's Anaconda Mining Company, expressly forbade African Americans from working underground in the mines, as Daly claimed that the ensuing racial tensions would slow production. Richard's mining employment was an anomaly, and he became a prominent figure in the Butte African American community, helping to found Butte's African Methodist Church. He also coined the name Homestake to refer to the Continental Divide area in which Camp Caroline and the small town of Homestake were located. The Brown family also exercised great entrepreneurship in the Homestake area. Richard's two sisters, Betty McFonnell and Nanny Coughlin, owned and ran the Browns' boarding house at Camp Caroline. Another side note, if anyone knows anything about the boarding house, this vexed us. So we are immensely curious to find out more about perhaps who was there, what was it like going and working in the area, et cetera, et cetera. If there's any photos, that would be amazing. Yes?
So this photo is the only known photo of it. It is supposedly over at the Whitehall Museum. They don't know where it is. So one of my winter projects is to go over there and maybe find it. And then we actually do have an oral history, which she goes on to talk about, from Lena Slauson, one of the daughters, who talks about this. Now, she was a kid when she was up there, and much like a lot of the oral histories that we have from children in the 1930s, she's like, oh gosh, it was all just fun and games up there. There was no drinking, there was no prostitutes up there. But how is a little kid going to know that, right? That's where archaeology can come in.
Back to the narrative. The Browns purchased the building in 1890 from George Lowry, who had in turn constructed it for Carolyn Van Horn. The boarding house, which Lena Slauson, Richard's youngest daughter, remembers as having 20 rooms on the second floor, provided food and lodging for local miners. Betty's, Nanny's, and Janettia's cooking was the only food for 14 miles, and hungry prospectors could buy 20 full meals for $5. This boarding house operated until the 1930s. Another side note, if you are curious about the types of foods that were offered at the boarding house, in the Butte Heritage Cookbook, there are 2 of these recipes for cocoa bread and coconut candy that survive from this boarding house that you can come, look at, take a picture of, and make when you go home.
Oh, like we don't have our own copy of the Butte Heritage Book.
Sorry, see?
And if you don't, we do.
Eventually, mining's boom and bust cycle and the closure of Carolyn Van Horn's 10-stamp mill in the 1920s after the post-World War I Depression led Richard to pursue more reliable employment. He became a custodian at the Butte Daily Post, where he worked for 25 years before his retirement in 1934. Richard died only a year later from heart problems aggravated by lead exposure that he experienced at the newspaper. His children went on to become prominent members in Butte. One of Richard's sons, Theodore, died young in 1924 after sustaining a gunshot wound to the hand. Hiawatha and Herbert were star athletes at Butte High School in the 1930s, playing basketball, baseball, and track. They honed their athletic endurance by regularly running from Camp Caroline to the nearby town of Whitehall, where they attended junior high. That's in the primary sources, so it's included in here. In the 1950s, Hiawatha worked for the Anaconda Copper Mining Company's underground diamond drill crew, becoming one of the first African-American men to mine underground Butte. He also coached youth sports at Grant Elementary, and his daughter Frances became the first African-American woman to teach physical education at Butte High. Hiawatha died at the Berkeley Pit in 1962 at only 49. Herbert also went into mining, working for the Anaconda Reduction Works until his death in 1961, only a year before his brother. I think that's exactly right. Herbert's daughter also had an athletic career as the first African-American cheerleader in Butte, which I believe you can see that picture right there. Lena, Richard's youngest daughter, contributed to several oral histories about her family and the African-American community at Camp Caroline, and she died in 2008. And I believe those transcripts are available in the Butte archives. This last piece, Camp Caroline's legacy, is one that is of immense interest to the group, and we could not find a lot on it. There was one little newspaper snippet that I will show here, but we had one student who was really interested in the Boy Scout presence up at Camp Caroline and in the area. So right here, she pulled out this newspaper clipping from 1922 that talks about Troop 18 having a successful overnight trip at Camp Caroline. I think she had other snippets that showed that they were up there skiing in really, really cold weather.
Is this that same troop that's in the news right now? Does anyone know it's the 100th anniversary? Was it Troop 18 too?
I don't remember.
I don't know what troop it was.
Yeah, the one that got hit by lightning.
Yep. Yeah, it's the same year. This would have been 2 months
Yeah.
prior to that. So yeah, kind of a fun connection in a timely fashion.
But if you know any fun stories about people recreating in the 20th century in and around this area, we'd love to hear them. And then I'll just finish off with some of the deliverables. As Ayme said, this is an ongoing project, so we're hoping to attract probably the same amount of students, both undergrads, graduates from MSU, U of M, and we hope people will pick it up for school projects. We hope people will publish on it. There's potential maybe for Forest Service publications and a potential nomination. And if you have any good stories that you feel like you don't want to share publicly or right now, here's some contact information. Thank you very much.
question, going back to the cheerleaders, because I
Oh,
know you're
yes.
one of those girls.
Oh, yeah.
So, was Rachel the last of the family in Butte?
No,
Is there still family?
So, go ahead, what do you got?
John, I think, was Rachel, did you know John Brown?
No, but I knew Rachel.
I think Rachel was his sister, John.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know the family quite as much as one of the other gals did. I do know that Randall Brown is still around, and he's the one that has the claim up there. And I've been trying to get a hold of him. And he would be Lena Slosson's son.
Oh,
Mhm. I believe, yeah.
who was Rachel's dad?
Rachel.
I can pull up a family tree if
Oh, that's right.
you bear with me
Yeah.
for a second.
Yeah. We had one student that was very, she went in really good depth with this. It's another one of those why we had to reach out, you know?
Just bear
Oh, yeah.
with
Do
me.
you guys know what the Catawba Club is?
The what?
Catawba Club?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We
It was-
found reference to the Catawba
It
Club.
was probably like a lecture series, and it's strange that they called it the Chautauqua instead of a Chautauqua. You know, because they used to, in the East, they used to have the Chautauquas.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm guessing.
Well, and it was in the newspaper, and it was in yearbooks, both as the Catawba.
Oh, so maybe it was a high
Club.
school.
We were wondering, yeah, but
Study club?
we couldn't find any
Yeah.
particular club photo.
Huh.
It was just like reference to them, and yeah.
Huh.
Let's see how far down this goes. Is Rachel on there?
Nope, gosh,
Dara would know.
I know. I think Rachel is Herbert's daughter.
Yeah, that's the one that's
Yeah, I think Rachel is Herbert's daughter.
Who's still alive, John?
So you could pass on, maybe that student doing the genealogy could get on the family search and put all of that
Yeah.
on there, and,
Well,
and then
she's-
it'll make a nice tree.
she's one of the ones wanting to become a grad student, so like,
Yeah.
there's hope.
Yeah.
There is hope. Yeah. Yeah.
Joe said
Yeah.
John's still
You guys been doing
alive.
subsurface testing up there?
Whoa, good question. So yeah, spoken like a true archaeologist. Yeah, next summer we are planning on doing that. So right now it's in the works to secure funding for a super duper hoity-toity metal detector that's basically like GPR too. And so we're hoping to find that boarding house. When something burns down, it leaves a bunch of nails, and I've been on several projects where that's where we find stuff. And boy, when you look at it, it is a perfect rectangle. An archaeologist would love to dig right underneath here, because when you're on the porch, you're losing things, right? If you're not digging in a privy to find cool stuff, you're digging under the porch and underneath windows and doors. We're really, as soon as we can. I hate Swiss cheesing the land. I hate to dig just to dig. Like, I'm not a very good archaeologist when it comes to that. I could put a test unit here and be like, oh, sterile ground. When if I put it 10 centimeters over here, I would have found out that, this gal that likes pink and purple was working there. So we have to key in a little bit more of where we're going to put them, but yes.
Volunteer.
Yeah. Oh, I've already signed you up.
I couldn't see the map very well that you had up there.
Well, that's on purpose.
Okay, but what I wanted to know is this site roughly 5 miles north of the eastern portal of the tunnel up there at Home?
Yeah, just about. Yep. It is on Forest Service. Both sites that we're interested in are on Forest Service land. And then there's just claims everywhere. And so that brings up an interesting point. So Camp Caroline proper, the Camp Caroline claim, we're not interested in that. I'm actually not sure how that got its name. I'd love to get a hold of that person and say, hey, what do you know about your name here? Because what we're kind of figuring out is that Camp Caroline, they refer to that whole area north of Homestake as Camp Caroline. From the stamp mill that is up about another 1.5 miles to almost right to where the Homestake town border would have been. And then clear to Delmo Lake too. In one of Lena Slosson's oral interviews, she talks about how her and her siblings would just go on a hike over to Delmo Lake. That's 4 miles. Like, now we would never send our little children. Would you send your son on a 4-mile? Well, maybe.
Nah. Just being kind of a brat.
But yeah, it's it's a big space up there, and yeah, that's all where that is. Yep.
Can you drive up there, or do you have to hike in?
Both. So driving gets a little western up in there. It's definitely a 4-wheeler. Actually, earlier this spring we were talking about bringing the horses up there, and then we ended up just making our way up there. And then there are a few spots where you do have to hike. I haven't been to the stamp mill location yet because of all of the inholdings. There's a lot of gates and a lot of easements and a lot of all that kind of stuff that I have to, go through proper people. I don't want to get shot, so I'm gonna do it the right way.
What's a stamp mill?
Oh, good question. So it's part of that mining operation, and it's what they're actually making those bricks with. And I would love to see what that stamp says. We have a few different stamp mills on the forest, and they all have, I'm thinking of one right outside of Phillipsburg right now, where it says, Phillipsburg Mining Company. And I would love to see what that stamp mill says, because that was funded by Carolyn Van Horn with that Blackwell mine. But what it says could be so much. We don't know anything about Carolyn Van Horn. I mean, you wrote up that like 3 or 4 pages, but we don't know. I'm assuming she's white, but she is, okay, because we haven't been able to find confirmation of that. We know that her husband married a black gal later on, and so what I'm thinking is, gosh, what is her relation with this African American family? Is it simply because she can't find anyone else in Butte to work for her because she's a woman in 1880s, 1890s, and they're the only ones that are working with her? Or is it because she has a love for that particular culture? Why? That's something that archaeology really can't do, but that's where we get our historian friends involved. Archaeology can look into that boarding house, getting back to the test pits. I cannot wait to see what that dump actually says, what they were eating, what they were using. If indeed they were using just the run-of-the-mill cheap ironstone, or did they have fancier things? They talk about feeding a lot of people up there, yet we can't find the can dump, which, as any archaeologist knows, that's the first thing you look for is a can dump. Well, and then, was it Dale or who told?
Dale was talking about World War I.
Yeah, how when World War I came around, and probably II also, they went and got all the cans and brought them in, for metal. But it's still unusual that there is no remnants of any kind of can dump, or bottles. People weren't collecting bottles at that time. And it's enough off the beaten path that I don't think looters would have, but nonetheless, looters only take full bottles. There's hardly any broken bottles up there. So I just don't know if we have found the dump yet.
And what was the name of the name on the boards that you found?
Oh,
J.E. Kendall. Which, other than just a brief census look, we don't have much on. And they were neighbors to the Browns.
Yep, neighbors to the Browns.
When did the boarding house burn down?
Oh, so that's, I think the 1988 fire got us up there.
That's what I thought.
Okay, yeah.
Did was there another cabin there? A small?
Yep.
John Brown told me at that time that, because he was concerned because of the fire up there,
Yeah.
that all their family history was wrote on the walls in there, their family.
At the boarding house?
No, in
Cabin?
the other cabin.
Huh.
So
We might have to do this
I
program
hadn't
if
seen
you
it.
were there.
We were gonna go look and I'd never gone.
Yeah.
And I knew John personally,
Yeah.
but he told me all their family tree and history was wrote on there.
Well, it's not visible now. Not saying it's not there. We do have something called D-stretch, which we use it a lot for pictographs, where you can play with the different colors and they'll pop it out. And I will sure do that on those
That
walls.
cabin burned down.
Okay, so there is still a little cabin up there.
But there's another one that probably burned down that had that.
Okay.
I know the one that had that family history.
That one was one that burned down, yeah. Yep. Yeah. We have pictures of of those cabins from, gosh, it was like 2 months before that fire went through. Yep, like they went up and that was the original recording. And that's one of those things where at that time, they didn't spend the time to look whose it was. They just wrote it down and just dismissed it. The 80s were a weird time.
did you do some research on that guy Kendall, James B. Kendall?
We didn't do a deep dive, we just did census information. Do you know something?
No, I don't, but I just guessed that he would turn up somehow or other. There should be some history of him in some newspaper or something, I would think, or maybe a listing in the local directories or something.
We couldn't find him in the Polk directories, I know that. We did look there. And I don't think any of the students or myself did any of the newspapers or anything like that.
And of course, Polk would only cover really
Yeah.
Butte and Silver Bow County,
Sure.
and
That's
I'm not sure what their
Jefferson,
coverage
Yeah.
of, Whitehall or Jefferson County would
Well-
be. So sometimes you are limited to just the census
Yes.
every 10 years, and you're gonna miss
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
people.
Absolutely.
And
we do know
yeah.
that, like the Browns and the Flags had residency at both. We do know that they both had houses here in Butte, which is another reason for this partnership. Being a federal entity, my hands are tied with any archaeology on private land. But once we start getting these universities involved, they're a little bit easier to work with when we can actually go find the residents of the Browns and the Flags and do those archaeology test pits and see if there's any correlation between the boarding house location and the in-town. Yeah. Yeah.
so what's your youngest that you're allowed to take? Like, can I encourage my 17-year-old daughter who will start college next year
Absolutely. Yeah,
to apply to the field
absolutely, yeah.
school?
They are dry field schools, so there's no drinking, obviously no drugs, and preferably no COVID. And so it's other than that, it's a very welcoming environment.
Yeah.
My professor, Kelly Dixon, she always brought they're almost grown up now, but her little kids with us, and their little fingers could dig through those screens so well. And really funny, like they're the ones that are gonna find that opium pipe that other students are just like, it's just trash, and they're like, what is this?
Yeah.
Do the artifacts stay in Montana?
Yes.
'Cause
Great question. So here on the forest, we practice no collecting. We collected a little bit for this just because we knew we were going to do presentations, but we typically don't collect, and that's because we don't have a repository large enough. There is no reason for us to if it ends up staying there. I always do a pretty good job hiding it once I see it and document it, and I just kind of give it back to the earth. Particularly is true for native artifacts. We still don't collect those. I will take a 3D photo of it with my fancy phone, and I don't collect it for a few reasons. Number one is storage. We don't have that proper space to store these artifacts. Actually, Kate McCourt and I worked on a project in the East Coast where we did an inventory of the United States Naval Museum. And we learned a lot about curation, and I know they didn't have proper curation stuff, nor do we. So we're not going to collect that. The second reason I don't collect pre-contact artifacts, arrowheads, hammerstones, that kind of stuff. I lived with the Northern Cheyenne for a little bit over right on off of 212 with an elder over there, and he came up to me and he says, "Why do you white people keep putting my ancestors' tools in your pockets?" I'm like, "I don't know, Linwood, like, what are you talking about?" And he goes, "When my ancestors, when they make those tools, parts of their souls go into those tools. And I don't think you need my ancestors' souls in your drawers or your pockets." And I'm like, "Gosh, I don't think I do either. That doesn't sound good." So I don't collect. We will, the artifacts that we have, like this really fun cone top can, which I can give a great history on. It's very fun. This was from the Anaconda Brewing Company. Actually, one of our timber guys came and brought us this. And every time they're like, "Hey, Archie, we got an artifact for you," and they throw it at me, and I'm like, "Oh, yes, okay,
It
thanks."
means nothing out of context.
Where did you find it?
Yeah.
And it's not okay, but I also like, well, if a dozer was gonna run it over, thanks, Did that answer your question? The roundabout way.
Yeah.
Well, I was,
What about Native Americans? Were there Indians up there or tribes?
Yes, and it is so underdocumented up there. There's been a few, over on the Whitehall side and the Pipestone side. We have Pipestone, of course, which is a huge native area. And then there are pictographs over on that side. But looking at the database, there is a real void up here. And part of that reason is because when we survey the land, it's usually for a timber sale, and it's at triage archaeology, where we are just doing the surface survey. We're just looking at what we can see on the top. We're probably not going to see arrowheads on the top. This is a replica, so we can pass it around. I can tell you what this is, but it's a fun one. But we're probably not going to see something like this if it's buried or under the duff, right? But we do have, in Lena Slosson's, one of her oral histories, she talks about paintings, Indian paintings on some of the rocks between Camp Caroline and Delmo Lake. So that is one of my goals, is to do that survey through there and see if we can relocate that. When Randy and I were actually out on the fire last year on the haystack fire, just to the north, maybe about 5-7 miles, I did come across a hafted hammerstone. And then doing archive research, back in 1936, somebody else found a hammerstone while they were putting in some of that road at Homestake. Yeah, so yes, but we just don't have a lot of the evidence yet.
Wow, so many great connections. I know my brain is just like going in lots of directions from the things that you found. So thank you all so much. I hope that you can fund this for years and find the answers to all of these questions
Absolutely.
and make more questions.
Yeah.
On that one slide there, when it talked about the Mountain Chief being the first mine up there in 1880 something, I think I'd check on that. The first mine was the Homestake mine.
Oh, okay, okay.
And then when Kendall owned it, people referred to it as the Kendall mine. And then when other investors got into it, they changed it to the Blackball.
Gotcha.
And before Camp Caroline was known as Camp Caroline, it was known as Lion Gulch, or
Yeah.
Lion Gulch Mining Company.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's some conflicting stuff about Caroline when she came here.
Mm-hmm.
She's involved in lawsuits long before officially she got here.
Yeah.
So she was up there doing stuff, and so was her
Kind of a
brother.
shady character.
And then that doctor that came in there moved into her old cabin house.
Yeah.
cottage. He really slammed her and talked about how inefficient she was and blah, blah, blah. And he had it all wrong. He must have used hearsay. And then he talked about the 5-stamp mill. Well, some of the records will show that there's 2 5-stamp mills, and then other records show that there's 10-stamp mill.
We think it's a 10 stamp. Yep, we do think, we will confirm that as soon as I get through those gates. Yeah, yep, but there is only one up there, we know that. We know that there
I've
is
never
only
seen
one.
the other one. I know what happened to the big boiler that was up at the mill.
Oh,
They
yeah?
scrapped that out in the
Yeah.
late 60s.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we did find some of those newspaper articles about all those lawsuits, and we were wondering, gosh, is that why she's not investing in Butte proper here? Like, word of mouth spreads, even then without telephones and text message, people are getting to know names, and if she is an investor and she's coming here, and folks are still like, well, we don't get her out of here, like, we don't want her in Butte, but she's trying to make it big too. We were wondering if that's part of why she is outside of Butte. And she's not talked about in any of the Butte newspapers.
I think she got tied up in that through investments when she was back in Chicago.
Yeah, in Missouri.
And then one article says she came out here as a representative of the stockholders.
Are these like apex type investments, like people encroaching on other?
Well, I think they were just
Yeah.
investing money to get the mine up and going.
Okay.
And it kind of had some ups and downs, and it actually was going before she ever got here.
Okay.
And and then other people mined up there after she left even.
Right.
They didn't slam her like that one doctor did, and I don't think he really knew a lot about the mine. He admits, I forgot his name now, he admits he's not a miner, but he talks like he knows a lot about something, but he did admit in the article that he's not a miner. And about the mill up there, he thought how stupid they were to put a cyanide mill up there. But when you read the documents around it, the brother to Caroline went to Salt Lake City and learned all about the cyanide process, brought ore down there, and they processed the ore down there, and they figured that was the best process for that area. And you know, the doc, he said, oh boy, that was stupid of them. They didn't have any idea what to do. And he said they didn't even have an assay office. But some of the early articles talk about how good, well-equipped assay office they had. So that's why I'm thinking that a lot of this stuff was off the top of his head. You know, I almost think when you read that, it's almost like in that era, he just thought that a woman could be the mine manager and operate that. I mean, that's the impression I get.
Totally. Yeah, that was actually the impression that we got also. Yeah.
Somebody must
Well,
have confidence in
archaeology
it.
will be able to confirm, contradict, or contribute to this. So we'll get back to you.
Very good.
Yeah.
This is primarily a gold mine then?
There was gold, silver, copper, lead, and zinc.
Oh, so there's a little everything.
A little bit of everything. Much like Montana, we're all just a little bit of everything.
Huh.
But that's unusual, like all in one.
It's pretty common, really,
You
when you
know,
start
is
looking
it?
at the mining records.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. One will be a tailing of something, or something will be a tailing of
Yeah.
something else, or they'll use something to. Yeah.
Okay.
There's probably way more miners in here that can talk about that with me. Well, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.